My mother turned me into a joke while I was carrying my last box into my new apartment. She used a happy moving day picture, the kind where I was sweaty, relieved, and trying to believe my life was finally getting quiet. Above my face, she wrote, "The 30-year-old Parasite finally left. Maybe now I can stop feeding a grown woman." By the time I saw it, strangers were laughing. I was standing in the hallway outside Unit 4B with a storage bin balanced against my hip when my phone started buzzing like an alarm. At first, I thought it was the internet installer or my best friend Brooke asking if I needed help. Then I saw my own face on Facebook, posted by Linda Warren, my mother, with a caption that made my stomach go perfectly still. Not angry, not sad, not even shocked at first, just still. The comments were already rolling in faster than I could read them, and every new one felt like someone stepping into my apartment before I had even unpacked. My Aunt Denise commented first because, of course, she did. She wrote that some kids never grow up, and people liked it like she had said something wise instead of cruel. My sister Avery tagged 2 friends and joked that I was the reason men were afraid of dating women over 30. Someone from church posted laughing emojis. Then Ryan Cole, my ex, hit the like button. And somehow that tiny little thumbs up felt more pathetic than everything else. I didn't answer anybody. I didn't defend myself. I sat down on the floor between 2 boxes labeled kitchen and office, and I started taking screenshots. The thing nobody in that comment section knew was that I had not been living at home because I was helpless. I had been living there because my family had turned my competence into a free utility, like Wi-Fi or running water, and then convinced themselves it had always been theirs. I ran a digital operations and risk compliance company from my bedroom, which sounded fake to people who thought real work required a uniform, a parking pass, or sore feet at the end of the day. I had clients in 4 states, 2 part-time contractors, and enough savings to move out without asking anyone for a dime. My family knew pieces of that, but they never respected the whole of it because respecting it would have meant admitting they depended on me. Carl, my father, owned a plumbing supply business that looked stable only because I kept catching the cracks before anyone else saw them. I fixed invoice errors, flagged vendor problems, cleaned up payroll issues, and reminded him about deadlines he later pretended he had remembered himself. My mother sold handmade home decor online and told people she built her little shop through grit and prayer, which was sweet as long as nobody mentioned who rebuilt her storefront after it crashed, or who answered angry customers under a neutral support name. Avery was trying to become a lifestyle influencer, and I had saved her from more bad contracts than she had actual sponsorships. Denise had a consignment booth with records so sloppy, I used to clean them up before tax season just to keep her from setting herself on fire financially. So when I moved out, I did it cleanly. No screaming, no dramatic announcement, no final speech from the doorway. I spent 6 weeks separating my life from theirs, moving my own systems first, then removing my personal credentials from every account where I had been quietly acting as the emergency adult. I made transition notes for the few things that were fair to hand off, but I did not leave keys to my labor sitting on the table. I was not planning revenge. I was planning peace. My mother's post did not create that decision. It proved I had made it just in time. By that evening, the post had spread beyond family. Old classmates were reacting to it. Neighbors were commenting like they had purchased tickets. People who had eaten food at our house and smiled in my face were suddenly comfortable calling me lazy in public. I liked every comment, one after another, because I wanted a record of who laughed when they thought there would be no cost. Then I opened a folder on my laptop and named it Proof. Inside it, I saved the post, the comments, the timestamps, and the private messages that started arriving from people pretending they were only checking on me. Brooke called before midnight and didn't even say hello. She said, "Please tell me you didn't respond." I told her I hadn't, and she let out this long breath like she had been holding it for both of us. Brooke knew everything. She had seen the contracts, the tax folders, the late-night calls, the spreadsheets, the emergency logins, and the way my family mocked the exact work that kept them comfortable. After a few seconds, she said, "Natalie, they have no idea what they just did." I looked around my half-empty living room, at my standing desk still wrapped in plastic, and my monitors waiting against the wall, and I said, "No, they really don't." The next morning, I woke up on an air mattress with my neck stiff and my phone face down on the floor. For about 10 seconds, I forgot why I had turned it over. Then it buzzed again, slid an inch across the hardwood, and everything came back. I made coffee in a kitchen where half the cabinets were empty, opened Facebook, and saw my mother's post had crossed into that ugly second stage where people stop reacting to the original joke and start adding their own stories to keep the room entertained. Denise brought up the time I got rejected from a grocery store job at 25, like she had been saving that little humiliation in a drawer. What she left out was that I had applied during the worst 6 months of my adult life, after a major contract fell apart and I was trying to grab any routine that would stop me from spiraling financially. Avery replied with laughing emojis and wrote, "She's always been dramatic," even though she had called me crying 2 weeks earlier because a brand wanted rights to her content forever, and she didn't know what the word perpetual meant. Carl didn't comment, which was worse in its own way. My father's silence always meant he approved, but wanted someone else's hands dirty. I spent that morning turning the screenshots into a timeline. There was the original post, then the first wave of family comments, then the old classmates, then Ryan's like, then the little private messages from people saying things like, "I hope you're okay," while still leaving their laughing reactions up. I did not write a response. I did not call my mother. Instead, I opened my admin dashboard and checked every place where my name had been quietly holding their lives together. My personal recovery email was still attached to my mother's storefront. My phone number was still the emergency contact on Carl's payroll software. Avery still had shared access to a folder where I kept old contract notes because she never remembered where she saved anything. By noon, I had removed what belonged to me. Not their accounts, not their property, not anything illegal or messy. Just me. My backup codes, my recovery numbers, my private templates, my saved vendor reminders, my personal monitoring alerts, my administrative access where I had never been paid, never been named, and never been respected. I created a clean, professional notice from Warren Digital Risk Solutions, my actual company, and wrote it like I would write to any client whose informal support needed to end. The language was calm because my anger did not need decoration. Effective immediately, I would no longer provide unpaid operations, compliance monitoring, invoice cleanup, storefront maintenance, contract review, or emergency support without a formal agreement. I attached a summary of the hours I had logged over the past 11 months, because that was one habit my family never knew I had. Every time my mother shouted my name from the hallway because a customer was angry, I logged it. Every time Carl dropped a folder on my desk and said, "Can you glance at this?" I logged it. Every time Avery sent me a contract at midnight with, "This looks normal, right?" I logged it. The number at the bottom was 1,311 unpaid hours. I stared at it for a long time, not because it surprised me, but because seeing it as a number made the theft harder to soften into family obligation. On day 3, the first small crack appeared. My mother texted, "Do you remember the password for the shipping app?" That was all. No apology, No mention of the post, no embarrassment that she had publicly called me a parasite and then privately reached for my help like nothing had happened. I read it while sitting at my new desk, surrounded by cables and empty monitor boxes, and I felt this strange calm settle over me. A year earlier, I would have answered automatically. 6 months earlier, I would have been mad but still answered. That morning, I took a screenshot, saved it to the proof folder, and went back to setting up my own office. By day 4, Carl called once and hung up before voicemail. 10 minutes later, he texted, "Need login for invoice thing." That was my father in 4 words: vague, demanding, and allergic to admitting dependence. I knew exactly what invoice thing meant. A supplier reconciliation window was closing, and the software would not forgive his usual habit of clicking around until something looked right. He had mocked my laptop work for years, called it playing office, and asked when I was going to get a real job. Now his real business was waiting on the fake job he never bothered to understand. Brooke came over that night with takeout and found me sitting on the floor sorting cables by length, like a woman trying very hard not to scream. She read the newest messages, then looked at the old Facebook comments, and her mouth tightened. "They're not confused," she said. "They're testing whether humiliation changed the service plan." I laughed, because it was exactly the kind of sentence only Brooke could say, sharp enough to hurt and true enough to keep. Then she got serious and told me not to mistake silence for cruelty. "You are not harming them by refusing to keep rescuing them," she said. "You're letting their own systems show the truth." By day 6, the truth started getting louder. Marcy Collins, the neighbor who noticed everything but rarely sounded mean about it, texted that my mother had snapped at the mail carrier over a missed package signature. A repeat customer also emailed an old support address asking why tracking had not updated on 2 orders. That email still forwarded to me for security alerts, and my fingers hovered over the keyboard from pure muscle memory. I knew how to fix it. I knew exactly which setting Linda had probably touched and exactly which customer note would calm the situation. Then I closed the email without answering, because touching it once would turn my boundary into a suggestion. On day 7, Avery finally texted me, and the message was so perfectly her that I almost respected the consistency. She didn't ask how I was doing. She didn't mention the Facebook post or the comments she had fed like tossing crumbs to pigeons. She wrote, "Can you look at a contract real quick?" That was it. Like I was a vending machine for competence, and she still had the right coins. I sat at my desk in my new apartment and stared at the message while the morning light came through the blinds in clean stripes. The apartment still smelled like cardboard, coffee, and the lemon cleaner I had used on every counter because I wanted the place to feel like mine from the first week. My first instinct was to ask what contract, because old training does not disappear just because you finally see it clearly. Then another text came in from Avery. "Brand needs an answer tonight." A third followed 5 minutes later. "Don't be petty." I saved all 3 messages into the proof folder and did not answer. That afternoon, I sent the formal notice. She wrote, "After everything I've done for you, this is how you act?" Then, an hour later, "It was a joke and you know it." Then, "You're embarrassing this family." I looked at those words and actually laughed in my kitchen, because the woman who had put my face on Facebook for sport was now upset that consequences had an audience. I did not reply. I ate toast over the sink, opened my client calendar, and worked 6 billable hours for people who knew what my time was worth. On day 9, Avery's panic finally cracked through her attitude. Her first messages were still blame, because blame was her native language when she was scared. She wrote that I knew the deadline was coming, that I was doing this to my own sister, that I could fix it in 10 minutes if I wanted to. Then the tone dropped. They're threatening legal. Then, please, I'm serious. Then, after a long pause, I can't afford this. That one stayed on my screen longer than the others, not because it softened me, but because it was the first honest thing she had said all week. The strangest part was that I did not feel happy. People imagine these moments like a victory scene, where the wronged person smiles while everyone who hurt them falls apart. It did not feel like that. It felt quiet, heavy, and clarifying. I was watching adults discover that the safety net they had mocked was not part of the floor. I knew they were scared, and I also knew fear was not the same thing as remorse. Brooke had said that to me the night before when she came over and found me reading voice notes without playing them. Don't confuse panic with love, she told me. That was when their messages changed. My mother moved first into the wounded voice she always used when she wanted guilt to do the job of accountability. She wrote, "After everything I've done for you, this is how you act?" Then, an hour later, "It was a joke and you know it." Then, "You're embarrassing this family." I looked at those words and actually laughed in my kitchen, because the woman who had put my face on Facebook for sport was now upset that consequences had an audience. I did not reply. I ate toast over the sink, opened my client calendar, and worked 6 billable hours for people who knew what my time was worth. On day 9, Avery's panic finally cracked through her attitude. Her first messages were still blame, because blame was her native language when she was scared. She wrote that I knew the deadline was coming, that I was doing this to my own sister, that I could fix it in 10 minutes if I wanted to. Then the tone dropped. They're threatening legal. Then, please, I'm serious. Then, after a long pause, I can't afford this. That one stayed on my screen longer than the others, not because it softened me, but because it was the first honest thing she had said all week. The strangest part was that I did not feel happy. People imagine these moments like a victory scene, where the wronged person smiles while everyone who hurt them falls apart. It did not feel like that. It felt quiet, heavy, and clarifying. I was watching adults discover that the safety net they had mocked was not part of the floor. I knew they were scared, and I also knew fear was not the same thing as remorse. Brooke had said that to me the night before, when she came over and found me reading voice notes without playing them. Don't confuse panic with love, she told me. People will sound broken when access gets cut off. On day 10, the story escaped their phones and landed back on Facebook. A local customer posted on the community page that Linda's shop had taken payment for an order and stopped responding about shipping. Another customer replied with a similar complaint. Then a third person added screenshots, and within an hour, my mother's cute little business page had turned into the kind of neighborhood drama people pretend not to enjoy while refreshing every 5 minutes. At first, the complaints were about missing packages and bad communication. Then, someone recognized her name from the post about me. Then, someone wrote the comment that changed the temperature completely. Maybe don't publicly mock the daughter who was clearly keeping your business alive. My mother's public humiliation of me had started as entertainment, so there was a strange kind of justice in watching her discover how fast entertainment can turn. The community thread kept growing, and every new comment seemed to pull another loose wire from the image she had spent years building. One woman said she had ordered a custom wreath for her mother's birthday and never received tracking. Another said Linda had ignored 3 emails until she threatened a chargeback. Then someone posted, "Wasn't this the same lady calling her daughter lazy last week?" I did not comment. I did not need to. That was the part my family could not understand, because they had always believed I was quiet because I was weak. Really, I was quiet because I knew documentation ages better than arguments. While people online connected the dots, I kept working for my actual clients, answering professional emails, and building a new morning routine that did not include my mother yelling from down the hall. The silence in my apartment no longer felt empty. It felt like a door that finally closed behind me. By that evening, the people who had laughed at the original post started cleaning up after themselves. A church friend removed her laughing emoji and replaced it with a heart under my mother's business complaint thread, as if that counted as moral growth. A man who had joked that I needed to learn a skill deleted his comment entirely. Ryan, my ex, unliked the post sometime before dinner, which made me laugh harder than I expected. He had wanted the cheap little thrill of joining a crowd, but not the discomfort of being seen in it later. Cowardice is very tidy when it thinks nobody is taking screenshots. Denise called first that night. I let it go to voicemail because there was no version of her voice I needed live in my ear. Her message began with a syrupy, "Natalie, sweetheart," and ended with her breath shaking because a filing issue had turned into penalties she could not talk her way around. She said she knew things had gotten ugly, but family needed to help family. I replayed that sentence twice, not because I was tempted, but because I wanted to hear how easily people reached for the word family after using me as a punchline. Nobody had mentioned family when they were laughing at the grocery store rejection she dragged out for sport. Nobody had mentioned family when my mother's friends treated my life like open mic night. Carl's messages were uglier because he had no talent for softness. First he wrote, "Call me." Then, "This is affecting real business." Then, "You made your point." That last one bothered me more than I wanted to admit, because it proved he still thought this was a performance designed to teach him a lesson. He did not understand that I had not stepped back to punish him. I had stepped back because I was tired of being treated like a broken appliance that could still be useful if everyone kicked it hard enough. Around midnight, Brooke came over in sweatpants with a grocery bag full of sparkling water, instant noodles, and those expensive cookies she always bought when someone's life was on fire. She sat on my couch, scrolled through the messages, and got quieter with every screen. Brooke was funny when things were ridiculous, but when she got angry, she turned calm in a way that made people nervous. Finally, she handed the phone back and said, "They still aren't apologizing. They're negotiating with the consequences." I knew she was right, but hearing it out loud kept me from softening too soon. The next morning, day 11, my father sent the message that changed the weight of everything. It said, "We may lose the house." I read it standing in front of my bathroom mirror with a toothbrush in my hand, and for a moment, all the noise fell away. I knew parts of that problem already. Months earlier, Carl had shoved a spreadsheet at me and asked me to glance at it, which meant fix whatever he had already ignored. I had seen the second mortgage pressure, the over-ordered inventory, the vendor timing tricks, and the way he was using optimism like a financial plan. When I warned him, he snapped that I liked acting smarter than everybody. Now the numbers had stopped letting him pretend. I did not create the crisis by leaving. I stopped covering it with my time, my passwords, and my unpaid corrections. That distinction mattered, because guilt tried to sneak in through the cracks. I pictured my mother's kitchen, Avery's old room, the front porch where I used to sit with my laptop answering customer emails under a fake support name while everyone else watched TV. Then I pictured the post again, my face under the word Parasite, with people laughing like they had been waiting for permission. Sympathy did not erase the math. That night, I finally opened the original screenshot beside the newest messages. On one side, Linda Warren was celebrating that her grown daughter was gone. On the other side, she was begging me to call because orders were frozen and customers were furious. On one side, Avery was tagging her friends so they could laugh at me. On the other, she was terrified of a contract I had warned her not to sign. On one side, Carl acted like my work was pretend. On the other, his real business was wobbling because the pretend work had stopped holding it upright. I slept badly, but I did sleep. When my phone rang at 8:14 the next morning, I knew before looking that it was my mother. Day 12 had arrived exactly the way I thought it would. Not with a dramatic explosion, but with one exhausted woman finally understanding that the person she mocked had been the person preventing the collapse. I answered and said nothing. For once, Linda did not start with anger. She started by crying and whispering my name like she knew she had no right to say it loudly. My mother cried for almost a minute before she managed a full sentence. I listened from my kitchen with one hand on the counter and the other wrapped around a mug I had not taken a single sip from. There were sounds in the background, cabinets closing, my father's voice low and tense, Avery saying something too far from the phone to understand. For once, my mother did not sound like she was arranging an audience for her pain. She sounded scared enough to forget how she usually performed. "Natalie, please don't hang up," she said. I didn't answer right away, because silence had become the only language in that family that made people tell the truth. She rushed to fill it, explaining that orders were frozen, customers were demanding refunds, Carl had missed another supplier window, Avery had received a formal notice, and Denise was crying over penalties she suddenly couldn't ignore. Then my mother said, "I just need you to tell us what to do." That was the sentence that finally made something in me harden. Not because it was cruel, but because it was honest in the wrong direction. She still wanted instructions before accountability. "No," I said. My voice came out calm enough that it surprised me. "You need to understand what you did." She started apologizing in pieces, the way people do when they are trying to find the phrase that unlocks mercy. She said the post was supposed to be a joke. She said it got out of hand. She said she was angry I moved out and wanted people to think she was relieved instead of scared. She said she never expected strangers to join in, which was a strange excuse considering she had posted it publicly and smiled while people she did know joined first. Then she said she didn't know I had done that much. That phrase almost made me hang up. I had heard versions of it my whole life, little half-admissions that still kept me smaller than the truth. So I made her listen while I named everything. I named the customer disputes I answered under a support alias, the chargeback warnings, the shipping automations, the payroll corrections, the vendor mismatches, the late-night password recoveries, the contract clauses Avery ignored, and the filing errors Denise never bothered to learn from. I told her that while she was online joking about feeding me, I had been preventing her store from being buried by her own disorganization. She went quiet after that. Not defensive quiet, not angry quiet, but the kind of silence that comes when someone finally runs out of places to hide. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller. "I was wrong," she said. There was no but after it. No explanation, no complaint, no reminder that she was still my mother. I had imagined hearing those words for years, and I always thought they would feel like relief. Instead, They felt like opening a door and realizing the room behind it was still damaged. An hour later, Carl called and asked if I would meet them in person. That alone told me how bad things were, because my father did not ask for things when he could demand them. His voice sounded older, but not softer, like the past 11 days had sanded him down without teaching him what humility was for yet. He said the house situation was serious and that they needed to talk face to face. I told him I would meet them downtown at 3, in the coffee shop they like to use for smiling family pictures. After I hung up, Brooke asked me one question from the doorway of my office. Are you going to save them or be heard? I looked at the proof folder open on my laptop and said, be heard. They were already sitting at a corner table when I walked in. Carl looked like he had not slept. My mother's makeup was uneven, and Avery had a legal envelope pressed under her palm like it might disappear if she held it down hard enough. Nobody joked. Nobody told me I was being dramatic. Nobody tried to hug me, which was good because I would not have hugged them back. I sat down, put my phone face down beside my coffee, and waited until the discomfort became too heavy for them to pass around. Carl spoke first. He admitted he had relied on me more than he ever acknowledged, and the words sounded awkward coming out of his mouth, like he was reading from a language he had avoided learning. He said he resented needing help from me because he did not understand the systems I understood. He admitted that the business problems were not new, only newly visible. My mother showed me a drafted Facebook apology and asked me to read it before she posted it. It named what she had done, admitted it was cruel, and did not hide behind the word joke. Avery cried while I read it and whispered that she had treated me like content instead of a sister. I told them exactly what would happen next. I was not moving back. I was not restoring unpaid access. I was not fixing everything by midnight so they could go back to pretending I had overreacted. If they wanted professional help, they could request it through my company, sign contracts, pay retainers, accept limited scope, and stop calling family a substitute for respect. Then I looked at my mother and said the public lie required a public correction. She posted the apology at the table while I watched. And for the first time in 12 days, the silence around me did not feel like restraint. It felt like control. Watching my mother post that apology should have felt like winning, but it didn't feel clean enough for that. The comments started changing almost immediately, and I could see people trying to reposition themselves in real time. Some acted shocked, as if they had not been there with laughing emojis under the first post. Others said family problems should stay offline, which was amazing considering nobody had minded when I was the one being dragged in public. I read enough to know the correction was visible. Then I put my phone down because I did not want my healing to depend on another crowd. Avery posted her apology next, shorter and clumsier, but direct enough that I accepted it as a start. She admitted she had tagged people for attention and that she had treated a real person's pain like content. Denise called while we were still sitting there, and my mother put her on speaker before Denise could turn the conversation into a private cleanup job. For the first time I could remember, Linda did not protect the family image over me. She said, "You need to apologize to Natalie, not to me." Denise stumbled through it, and I let the awkwardness sit there because some people only learn when nobody rescues them from the sound of their own behavior. Then came the part that mattered more than apologies. I opened my laptop and showed them how my company handled client intake,